Good morning. Welcome to day 20 of the hearing sessions examining the soundness of the Cambridge Local Plan 2014 and the South Cambridgeshire Local Plan. My name is Laura Graham and I've been appointed, together with Mr Wood, by the Secretary of State to carry out the examinations into these two plans. So I assume you can all hear me now. Okay, thank you. And as you all know, Ms Alexander is the Programme Officer. Now, we've received a request from the Federation of Cambridge Residents Associations to film and record the hearings today. As the owner of the property, South Cambridgeshire District Council has indicated that it has no objection in principle to this. However, the conduct of the examination is a matter for Mr Wood and I, and therefore filming is at our discretion. Does anyone present have any objection to the filming and recording of today's session? You're all content. In that case, you have our permission to film and record the proceedings. Please remember that as participants and observers change on a daily basis, permission is only given for today, and we will have to go through this procedure on with every occasion that you wish to film. And please switch off your equipment when the hearing is adjourned, because people may wish to have private conversations with their colleagues, and it's only fair that they should be able to do that. Furthermore, if I consider at any time that filming and recording is becoming distracting, disruptive or inhibiting participation in the discussions, I shall ask you to cease. Okay, I'll now ask Mrs Hunt to explain the procedures in the event of an emergency.
Thank you, Mr Graham. We're not anticipating a fire drill today, therefore if the alarm sounds, we then leave the building by either door, turn left, down the staircase and congregate at the far side of the car park until we're advised it's safe to re-enter the building. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I remind anyone who has a mobile phone, please, to make sure that it's either switched off or at least in silent mode. Now we'll aim to have a short break mid-morning and mid-afternoon, and we'll break for lunch at about 1 o'clock. I'm now going to ask those who are participating today to briefly introduce themselves. Start with Mr Smith.
Good morning, my name is Jeremy Smith from SLR Consulting. I've been working with Lands and Criminal Holdings and Kitchen Land, and yeah, that's what I'll say about it.
Thank you.
Myself, CSA Environmental, I'm acting on behalf of the North Boston Road Landowners Group.
John Adams of Deloitte, representing University's superannuation scheme and the Grosvenor developments in respect of land adjoining Trumpets and Meadows.
Morning, Peter Village Greens Council, Claire Rockhurst, and we're for CUG.
Good morning, Matthew Jarvis from the Landscape Agency. We're representing Barrett, Eastern Counties and North West Cambridge Consortium of Landowners.
Good morning, Gareth Hamlin from Sapples, representing St John's College, Cambridge.
Good morning, Joanna Gilbert-Aldridge, Cambridge City Council.
Good morning, Sarah Saunders, Planning Policy Manager at Cambridge City Council.
Caroline Hunt, Planning Policy Manager at South Cambridgeshire District Council.
Good morning, Charles Crawford, LDA Design. We undertook the Green Belt Boundary Review on behalf of the two councils, and I was responsible for that work. Good morning, Douglas Evans, QC, and Paris, I go for national policies.
Thank you. We'll turn now to my agenda for today, and I'm just going to start by emphasising the note that I've included at the bottom to just reinforce the scope of what we're going to be discussing today. And we don't intend to deal with site-specific issues. Now, I appreciate that you may want to give an example of a more general point with reference to something specific. I understand that. But this is not the opportunity for you to say, well, in respect of our site, this doesn't apply and that doesn't apply. Because we will be dealing with emission sites at specific sessions later in the programme, and that is the opportunity for you to give us that information. So yes, okay, using examples to illustrate a point is fine, but not a site-specific pitch, if I can put it in those terms. And I've also said that we're not going to be discussing today the relative merits of developing in the Greenbelt as opposed to developing elsewhere. And this is the paragraph 48 of the framework point. And the view that I've taken is that this is really an issue that's most closely related to the overall development strategy, and that has a number of strands, including those relating to the sustainability or otherwise of developing the new settlements. Now, we're going to be having specific sessions on those policies in the South Cambridgeshire plan, and my view is that once we have heard that discussion, we will then take a view on whether we need a further hearing session to look again at the development strategy. We had considerable discussion of that in the earlier hearings, and at the moment I haven't taken a view on whether we need any further hearing sessions on that. I'll make that decision further down the line. But I did think it would be useful to have this session today to examine the methodology of the new information on the Greenbelt review that's been undertaken in response to the letter that Mr. Wood and I sent last year. So that's my intention for today, is to be quite specific about looking at that new information rather than any wider considerations which we will come on to at a later stage. So the question that I've outlined to guide the discussion today is whether the Cambridge Inner Greenbelt study of November 2015 uses a methodology which enables a clear and transparent assessment of how the Greenbelt performs against the purposes of including land in the Greenbelt. And I've set out three specific points in relation to that, which seem to me to be the principal controversial issues arising from the representations that were received. And the first relates to the baseline studies and whether the methodology has been applied consistently across the study area. So I'm going to ask the council, and I imagine it's going to be Mr. Crawford who's going to be put in the hot seat, just to briefly explain the way that you approach this particular aspect of the study.
Thank you, yes. In terms of the baseline assessments, it's clear that the green belt purposes raise matters that are somewhat abstract, such as sprawl, setting, and so on. And that in order to undertake a meaningful assessment of the performance of areas of land against those purposes, you need to identify some criteria by which to make that assessment. And those criteria need to be derived from an understanding of the qualities and characteristics of the city and its surrounding landscape, which are capable of contributing to those green belt purposes. We therefore undertook a broad range of baseline studies in order to build up an understanding of the city, its surrounding landscape, the relationship between the two, with a view to defining those characteristics which ultimately became the 16 qualities. The majority of those, well, some of those studies were undertaken at a fairly broad level to provide context for our understanding, such as landscape and landscape and character studies. Others were undertaken with more specific details, such as identifying the location of urban gateways and the nature of the approaches to the city. But they cover a range of aspects which are set out in section 4 of our main study report. So there were factual aspects such as the historic developments of the city, designations, rights of way, recreation sites, topography and geology. Then there are aspects that require an element of assessment. Townscape and landscape character assessments I've already mentioned, visual assessment, analysis of the approaches and gateways, and an analysis of the role and function of the various areas of townscape and landscape in supporting the setting and character of the city, the so-called Winchester methodology. Those assessments typically followed established methodologies. There are published methodologies for townscape and landscape character assessment. The Winchester methodology is established, whilst we developed it, it has been used by others. It is referenced in the former Countryside Agency's landscape character assessment guidance. Those methodologies involve firstly the recording of observable facts on the ground, and secondly the application or the undertaking of analysis of those facts, exercising professional judgment to draw conclusions from them. And then the other baseline studies arose from that exercise in terms of starting to understand some of the characteristics or some of the features that were important to the character and the setting of the city. So one being the green corridors leading into the city. So a study was undertaken of those. And the other being the necklace villages, which surround the city and lie in fairly close proximity within the surrounding landscape. And clearly, it became apparent during our work that they contribute significantly to the character and setting of the city. So we equally analysed those villages in terms of their spatial distribution and factors that affect their sense of separation or otherwise from the city, and their character themselves, the inherent character of the villages and of the landscape around them, which in turn contributes to the character and setting of the city. By way of introduction, I think, unless there's anything else I can help you with, that's what I'll say.
Okay, well, there's just one thing that I'll explore with you before I invite other comments. You talked about established methodologies, and no doubt many, or at least some of us around the table, will be familiar with things like the Landscape Institute's LVIA guidance. But am I right in saying that there's little in the way of certainly that level of guidance when it comes to greenbelt reviews?
That's correct. If I could just pick up on the guidance on landscape and visual impact assessment, that nature of assessment wasn't something that we undertook as part of this. That is a means of understanding the effects of a specific development proposal, so that in itself wasn't directly applicable. But to your main question, yes, that's correct. There is no published or broadly accepted methodology for greenbelt assessment, and you will have seen obviously that various greenbelt studies have been undertaken by various parties around the table, and they all follow different methodologies.
Thank you. Now, I wasn't trying to suggest that the LVIA guidance was directly applicable, just that it's an example of an established methodology which, if I, for example, determine an appeal for wind turbines or something, I know that methodology is, or I would hope that methodology is what is going to be in front of me, but there's nothing equivalent for greenbelt reviews. We've got a little bit of guidance from the Planning Advisory Service, and there's something from the Planning Officers Society as well, but neither of them are that kind of level of detailed guidance about how to go about a review, I don't think. But I'll hear what others round the table have to say. So, does anyone want to comment on this first part of my agenda? Okay, if not, we'll move on. The second area of controversy seemed to me to be the issue of the identification of the areas for assessment. I think all the greenbelt reviews that I've seen go through some sort of process of dividing the greenbelt up into different areas for assessment. But there seems to be some comments from representatives here that the size of the parcels chosen was not appropriate. So does anyone want to... Yes, Mr. Hanlon?
Perhaps if I could just make some opening comments, which I appreciate other parties around the table have made similar issues. The issue is the land parcels chosen to be a significant factor. I would say yes it is, but first of all, the submissions that we've made are that in certain instances, larger areas have been chosen which, on reflection, could be broken down to smaller areas. And I'm conscious and I do not want to stray into site-specific issues. But if I turn to the Council's matter statement for this morning's session, the LDA design paper, and I'm looking at paragraphs 12 through to 16. Which I think certainly intend to address specifically the point about the size of areas. The sentence at the end of page 3, paragraph 13, states providing land in smaller parcels, particularly when associated with a scoring system that ranks parcels in relation to the number of green belt purposes or criteria they meet, obscures this gradual transition and can lead to the conclusion that certain parcels are of lesser importance to green belt purposes and should therefore be released for development. Well, I think that's the point that we're making. Yes, there could be a conclusion that parcels are of lesser significance than others, and that's entirely appropriate, but that shouldn't preclude a study looking at parcels in a sensible and logical manner, not simply make sweeping statements over large areas. And if I mention a site here, for example, but sites close to the M11 and enjoy, to my mind, from a green belt function, have a different role to play than sites perhaps closer to the edge of the city.
Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that. It was a fairly slight qualifying hand from paragraph 13. If I could refer to the remainder of that paragraph. Actually, sorry, can I step back and say something more generally about the selection of the sectors and sub-areas on there and then address the specific point. Green belt purposes raise issues that must be considered at a broad scale, particularly character and setting. As much as considering the character and setting of a particular part of Cambridge, a particular section of the edge of the city, for example, it's essential to think about the character and setting of the city as a whole. Cambridge has an identity, an overall character as a historic city, which is more important than the separate characters or identities of its individual neighbourhoods or component areas. And it's the reason the Greenbelt for Cambridge was designated in the first place was to protect the overall character and identity of the city. That's referenced, if you did, Madam, in the Council's Matter 6 statement from last year. So it's therefore essential that we consider the role that the surrounding landscape and the townscape play in defining and contributing to the setting of the city as a whole. We've got to focus on the big picture. So when assessing specific areas of land for their performance of green belt purposes, we have to take areas of sufficient size that they can be considered in relation to the city as a whole. And it applies to the other purposes as well, although I'm talking mainly about character and setting. If you take very small parcels, they encourage you to look at them in isolation, somewhat with your blinkers on, and lose sight of the big picture. The larger parcels encourage you to maintain sight of the big picture. But going back to paragraph 13 of our statement, they still enable you to pick up the variations between one parcel and one part of the parcel and another. So we say in paragraph 13 of the statement, second sentence, where an area of land performs a particular role in relation to the setting of the city, that role is very unlikely to stop abruptly. It's much more likely, and tends to be the case from our studies, that it will gradually increase or reduce across an area of landscape with no clear boundary where it starts or stops. by taking larger parcels for assessment, it enables you to pick up those gradual transitions rather than taking a snapshot within a much smaller parcel, which may mean that you miss that broader scale picture. So that's the reason for the choice of the parcel sizes for the assessment of the performance against green belt purposes. However, alongside, or having established that the majority of the land in the green belt was important for green belt purposes, we did look at whether, nevertheless, there was scope for any areas of land to be potentially released from green belt for development. And we identified a number of areas in sectors 8, 10, 11, 12, and 13, where there was scope to release them on the basis that if those areas were released and the parameters we set out were complied with, the green belt purposes could continue to be performed substantially as effectively by the remaining land, even following that release. And in that consideration, we were not, we didn't simply look at the sub-area parcels we defined as a whole. We looked at smaller areas of land and the potential releases we identified in sectors 10 to 13 were all of areas that are smaller than one of our defined sub-parcels.
Mr. Hannon, did you want to respond?
I think Mr. Crawford says that, and then I appreciate those judgments to be made here. I fully understand that. But again, if I look at paragraph 14 of the LDA, response page 4, perhaps that, like you says, if you assess broader parcels of land, you look at broader effects, and maybe we should be looking at smaller areas which get more defined.
Okay. So, Ms. Brockhurst.
Thank you. The position that we had at the last sessions hasn't at all been addressed by the evidence of LDA. At the last session, we were critical of this broad sweep assessment that was undertaken by the council in its document, and for your reference, that was RD Strat 170. And in relation to Sector 10, for example, we were critical that that wasn't suitably broken down to allow for the variation. So an issue that affected one parcel, one specific issue that affected one part of the site, skewed the result as a whole in terms of the criteria that we used at that point. That's a different methodology, and I accept that. However, having been critical of the fact that the land parcels were too large then, when we turned to the approach of LDA for Sector 12, for example, they turn it from two smaller parcels or two large parcels into one. So it's gone further away from the point that we made last time. The council felt that there was a separation of two distinct parcels. LDA have said that isn't the case, it's just one piece of land. Has explained where it draws a line or why it draws a line. So that in relation to the transparency as to why that has to happen in that particular instance is not explained. It is simply a general, we think larger parcels are most helpful. Yet when you look within the LDA report, in some sectors they do tackle particularly smaller parcels. So you have to be consistent across the whole area. And there is a point at which LDA quite rightly may draw a conclusion that there is, for example, in Sector 11, land to be released. But its analysis is on broad brush total sector analysis, and then they make a smaller parcel identification. But that isn't based on analysis specifically for all those parcels. So it is the inconsistency across the green belt, and certainly a move away from what we were concerned about last time, which is now exacerbated by this report.
Mr. Carpen.
Thank you. Firstly, just a correction. In our assessment, Sector 12 is still 2 parcels, not 1 parcel. In identifying areas for potential release of the green belt, those releases or those opportunities were not identified as a result of those areas being of less importance to green belt purposes or performing green belt purposes to a lesser degree than the remainder of the land. It was an entirely separate exercise that followed on from the assessment of performance of green belt purposes. So in Sector 12, for example, the conclusions, the areas we identified for potential release are in sub-area 12.1, which is a wider sub-area extending out to Words Causeway. The conclusions in relation to 12.1 are set out in the study and apply across, in terms of conclusions, in terms of the performance of green belt purposes, apply across the whole of Sector 12.1. Notwithstanding the conclusion that that land on the north edge of 12.1 is important to green belt purposes, we then separately consider, notwithstanding that, could those green belt purposes continue to be performed substantially as effectively by the remaining land in Sector 12.1 if some land was taken out of it. And it's on that basis that we identify the scope for potential release on the northern edge of 12.1. So it's not a consequence, as I think Ms. Rocker is suggesting, that had we divided 12.1 into smaller parcels, we might have found that an area orbit was less important to green belt purposes and should therefore be released. Our identification of the potential for release is notwithstanding its importance to green belt purposes on the basis that those purposes can be equivalently performed by a smaller area of land.
I would just say the evidence of that second part, which was if we release, what is the performance of the remaining area against the green belt purposes, I don't see in the evidence. There isn't a 3 parts. First of all, what is the baseline and qualities? Second, what is the release, and then the verification of that release. And I think that second portion is not evident of. We then did a checking process that the remaining land would still fulfil a function. But just a correction to the correction, if I may. If you actually turn up to page 75 in RD Strat 170, sorry, that's the Council's Inner Green Belt document. Sorry, it's a correction to you have got 2 parcels. If you look at that plan, which is the point I'm making, so if you look at that plan, which is page 75 of RD Strat 170.
I'm not sure we can now answer at the moment. If you're going...
Well, can I just... I think you do need to just have that plan, and then I can make the point.
We will need that document.
Okay, we don't have that document before us. We've got the November 2015 study.
I think there's several documents.
So, can you just give the name?
The name of the document is the Cambridge City Council Inner Greenbelt Land Study 2002, which is the one we debated last time, but it's relevant on point I'm making, which is why I say there is an enlargement. Page number 75. So, you're there, thank you. Yes, so the point I make, which is that area of land was subdivided into two parcels. Our criticism last time was they were too large, and actually in the LDA assessment you haven't subdivided that into two. That parcel is in its entirety with some extra land incorporated, which includes the issues which I'm sure we'll get on to about designated features. That is the whole of 12.1. So, and the second section in the LDA report is actually additional land to what was originally set by the council. So your correction that you have got in two parts, I understand, but your two parts merge what we considered to be too large last time into one part.
Do you need a moment just to...
We don't, but I think there's
Okay.
confusion over the documents, because what we debated last time was the council's 2012 study, not the 2002 study. That's the document that supported the previous round of plan making. The council's reviewed that 2002 study and prepared the 2012 study, which is different from the 2002 study, so there has been a change. And there's no change between 2012 and the LDA study.
Do you have the reference for the 2012 study, just so that we can...
RT strap 210.
Thank you. We don't have that before us. Yes, this looks familiar.
With that 2012 study, obviously the sector 12, as it was then, was larger with smaller parts looked at. So there was subsectors 1 and 2 within that, showing it on the edge there was a consideration of detail scale, and the remainder was large. Of course, the LDA boundaries now have enlarged sector 13 to include a large swathe of sector 12. So in effect, enlarged sector 13. And sector 11, which was broken down into 4 parts, has been reduced in size and broken down into 2 parts.
In terms of the differences you're pointing out as to haven't looked in detail at areas due to our larger sector sizes, or sub-area sizes. That certainly isn't the case, and the direct evidence for that is that where we have identified an opportunity for release, those are identified in Sector 12, for example, as smaller areas than the sub-area parcels we identified for the assessment of importance to green belt purposes. Our assessment in terms of importance applies across the whole of our sub-area 12.1. And as we explain in paragraph 3.2.5 of the study, the sectors were subdivided into sub-areas where there were clear changes in their characteristics which would affect the application of the assessment criteria to different areas of land. Those being the assessment criteria for establishing the importance of the land parcels to green belt purposes. There are no changes in that respect between different parts of sub-area 12.1, and therefore we didn't subdivide it. There was no need to. But in identifying a smaller area as having the potential for release, that is evidence that we clearly looked at smaller areas in detail.
Can I just clarify? So what you're saying is that if it is a larger area, so for example in Sector 11, that is because there is no distinct change in character across that purpose, across that land in relation to the purposes. Or, yeah.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Can I ask you to address the question that Ms Brockhurst raised, that where you say, well, we came to the conclusion that a smaller area of land could be released because the purposes would be fulfilled by the rest of the sector, and she says that that isn't explained in your evidence. Could you address that point for me?
Yes, thank you. Where we do identify the potential for release, it is explained in each case. So if we're looking at Sector 12, which we're using as an example, paragraph 6.15.5 of the study on page 141. There's page 141. So that is the paragraph where we assess the scope of potential for release. The first, so just reading through it, any form of development extending up slopes onto the Garden Rock Hills would cause substantial harm. Right, about 5 lines down. However, given the encroachment that has already occurred, little further harm to green belt purposes will arise from further release of land for development west of the recently consented site, if carefully planned design in accordance with the parameters set out below. And then this specifically addresses Ms. Brockhurst's point. These parameters would avoid significant further harm for the following reasons. And we then set out 4 bullet points that take us over the page, which is the explicit consideration of whether further harm would arise from that potential release. And states that if the parameters, which are then set out below, that's on page 142, are compliant with, the land that would remain within the green belt would continue to perform the green belt purposes substantially as affected us
issue. The suggestion in the review asked was there was a second stage to the assessment process, that we assess that. It's simply if you do this, it's unlikely to happen rather than we will examine it for legal purposes once the new boundary is drawn. Just trying to
It comes to the same thing. I mean, we haven't set out a whole other section of the document that repeats the assessment on the assumption that those areas have been released, but we have undertaken the exercise of considering the performance of group art purposes if those releases were to occur. And we've done that there.
Okay, well, I hear, what you both got to say on that point. Mr. Self.
Yes, I've just got sort of one brief point to follow on from that. And the purpose of the Greenbelt assessment is to feed into the other studies to identify land that could potentially come forward to meet the need. And we're obviously not here today to discuss the need, but I think the general consensus is that Cambridge needs to accept significantly more growth than is probably being identified. I think the difficulty with identifying such large sectors in the Greenbelt assessment, it doesn't provide the flexibility to address different levels of need. So if several thousand houses needed provided or several hundred, if you're identifying very large areas, it doesn't, I don't think, help the decision maker in looking at alternatives. Now this could be addressed either by subdividing them further or providing greater commentary on the individual areas to identify the different characteristics within them. Ms. Brockhurst has looked at one area in some detail, but you'll be familiar with the rest of the settlement where some of the areas that are considered are very large indeed.
Well, I don't want to steal the council's thunder, but I know that they're going to say that their view is that they are meeting identified needs, and we've had a lot of discussion about that, and Mr. Wood and I have yet to come to a firm conclusion on that. But I just want to sort of preempt a repeat of some of the things that we went through yesterday. So when you say there's a consensus, I'm not quite sure quite what you mean by that.
Well, broadly from the promoters of land around in the assessment of need.
Okay, there are a lot of representations to the effect that the council has got the numbers wrong, but we have yet to come to a final conclusion on that point, and I don't want to sort of open up discussion about that side of things, which we discussed yesterday. But of course, if the council does want to comment on other points made, I'm quite happy to hear that.
I don't think we have anything to say on that.
Okay, Mr. Adams.
Thank you, Madam. I'd like to go back to the purpose of the exercise, which is to select land that can be released from the Greenbelt for sustainable development in accordance with paragraph 84 of the framework. The sectors clearly provide important context for that analysis, and as we've heard, in many cases, sites or parcels of land occupy a relatively small part of the sector, and indeed the character within the sectors can vary significantly, such as Sector 7, for example. In other cases, the mix of uses that are being put forward for those sites and could be and should be assessed as options in the development strategy involve built development and, in many cases, significant areas of open land in the form control of recreation and country parks. My point is that the sensitivity analysis should examine the relevant parcels of land and also take account of the broad options for development of those parcels, balance between built and open uses, as that clearly is relevant to how the Greenbelt would perform in that sector against the 4 key NPPF purposes. So I think that there is either a missing step in the analysis, or it's simply not clear or transparent how that fine-grained sensitivity analysis has been undertaken. It may be clearer in relation to the associated sites, but it's not clear what sensitivity analysis has been undertaken in relation to areas where the conclusion has been reached that development is not appropriate, but where options being put forward only relate to part of the sector. So I don't think the analysis is transparent.
The study we were commissioned to undertake was to assess the performance of the land around the inner Greenbelt against Greenbelt purposes. I wasn't quite clear whether Mr. Adams was suggesting that we should have assessed how the Greenbelt would perform if the various developments that are proposals that are being promoted were in place. But that wasn't part of the commission to do so. In relation to the consideration of the potential for Greenbelt release in each sector, in those sectors where we haven't identified potential, it has been done in the same way as those sectors where we have identified potential. So we looked at sector 12 as an example. If we take an example of a sector where we haven't identified potential, sector 7, the equivalent section of the sector assessments at the end of it, paragraph 6.10.4, we draw together the factors that enable us to conclude in relation to the importance of the sector to Greenbelt purposes. Sorry, page 113. Sorry, I've just been reminded that the addendum replaced the assessments.
I thought we had that with us, but it turns out we don't.
So page 9. So this assessment in the addendum reflects the subdivision of sector 7 into 2 sub-areas, which was not done in the initial study, the original study. At the bottom of page 9, paragraph 6.10.4 draws together the analysis in relation to the importance of the sector to Greenbelt purposes, and sets out the particular qualities that apply in this sector and lead us to the conclusion that it is important to Greenbelt purposes. And then over the page, paragraph 6.10.5 is where we consider the potential for release for development, exactly as we did with Sector 12 and the others. And we explain why we don't consider there is any potential for release. So from the third line, development in the sector, particularly in sub-area 7.2, which is the non-country park area. It would remove or reduce the distinctive separation between the edge of the city and the M11, which is an important part of the rural setting of the city, and contrasts particularly on the west side of the city, where there is clear separation between the M11 and the city edge, and rural landscape between them. That contrasts very strongly with the north edge of the city, where that separation of the A14 has gone and compromised the setting of the city. So we flagged that, and line 5 refers to the fact that it would also affect the well-designed distinctive gateway to the city being created to keep farm and Trumpington meadows. Within sub-area 7.1, which is the country park, it would also encroach on the green corridor on the River Cam and reduce separation between Cambridge and Granchester. So that paragraph, to take the example, and the same applies in the other sectors where we didn't identify potential for a release. What we do is we look at the reasons from the previous paragraph that the sector was identified as important, and we assess whether there is any scope for release without substantial harm to those matters.
Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Adams, do you want to come back on that?
We can clearly look at the conclusions of
Could you put your microphone?
Yes, we can clearly look at the conclusions of Sector 7 later in the hearing, when we look at specific commission sites, assuming that opportunity is available. But I would comment that even within 7.2, which is the sector that LDA have introduced in response to our projections, there is a significant difference between assuming development would occupy all of that sector and options which would include significant areas of land for recreation and an extension of the country park, and a relatively small proportion of the land being occupied by built development. And it's that step in the sensitivity analysis which I don't see has been undertaken, because it could well produce a different result. So I think the purposes of identifying sites that are suitable for sustainable development, building upon the sector analysis, the analysis needs to transparently go to a finer grain to look at specific parcels of land and the options of land use for that land, in order to conclude properly what its impact would be on the performance of the greenbelt in that area. That may not be a matter for LDA to do, but I'm not seeing that level of analysis in the evidence base that underpins the greenbelt work.
That was taken into account in considering the potential for development. It could be development in the form of a change of use to sports pitches, for example, and in fact included, appended to our main study document is a terrace walk plan that shows broadly the proposals, the Draper proposals for Sector 7, the division between what you might crudely call built development and open space development. So that was within our consideration in making that assessment.
Okay, well, we're going to come back to that specific point when we deal with the emission site. So I think we'll leave that there for today. Anybody else on the... Yes, Mr. Smith? Mr. Smith, if you append your nameplate when you want to join the discussion, then I'll know that you want to...
I'm a newbie, sorry.
Sorry, I do usually say that at the beginning, but I forgot to today, so apologies.
Thank you very much, Alan. I wonder if Mr. Crawford can help me so that I can understand why we have gone for these broad sectors with specific reference to a sector. And I'm going to talk about one. I realise we're not dealing with types of issues, but it's just by way of example. So if we look at 8.1, what I'd like to do is to take you to the landscape character figure 8, within your green belt study. Tell me when you have that, please.
Could you give us the document number that you're...
I'm sorry, I don't have that reference, but we're talking about the... Thank you very much. So within that, I would just refer you to the area south of Trumping there within sector 8, and you can see that there is two character areas there.
I'm sorry, we need to know which page or which figure or...
I'm on figure 8 now.
Right, okay, thank you.
Landscape character. Do you have that? Yes. Yeah. So if we look at character area 4B and 4C, and perhaps if you're able to also have in hand figure 2 in that same drawing pack, just so that you have in mind what area sector 8.1 covers. You'll notice if you look in between figure 2, which defines sector 8.1, if you're then able to, and appreciate there are different scales, so it takes a bit of map reading skill. If you then look at the division between 4B and 4C, you'll see it actually crosses 8.1. So it goes roughly across the middle of the site. I want you to keep that in mind because that's not the end of my point. And then I want to refer you to another drawing in this same drawing plan, which is figure 9, which is the visual assessment. And the visual assessment, again, if we look at this area, we see that there is a green colour applied to the northern end of sector 8.1. And if we look at the key, it says level views, countryside foreground, mixed urban edge. So I'm really sharing some of the concerns that have been expressed about why we have gone for such broad sectors, and I'm evidencing my concerns with specific reference to this sector, because if I look at the flow from the evidence base, I can see that there's a character assessment break across this site. I can see that there's a visual assessment break across this site. And yet, when I look at 8.1, or I look at any of the text that relates to 8.1, I see no analysis that acknowledges that there is any great difference across 8.1. And yet, the evidence in my own eyes is that there is a character difference across that site. So I suppose the point I'm making is twofold. One is obviously, how do we arrive at these sectors? My understanding was the sub-areas were meant to reflect character, and yet your own evidence base here clearly shows that the sub-areas don't reflect changes in character. So that's my first point. My second point then is, if they don't, if that isn't reflected, if those changes across the site aren't reflected, what does that mean for your assessment? Does that mean that we're missing not just subtleties, but actually significant points of difference across these sectors, which then, as has been mentioned, means that we're then missing opportunities potentially for releasing a development plan.